So we have Darren Austin Hall here, and he is a modern druid. His service to the world includes being a mystical musician and song channeler and poet. He's also a sound healer and a spiritual sage. And he is very talented with sound healing from spiritual dimensions. And his mission is shifting the consciousness into mystical states and opening pathways for higher wisdom. And today he's going to be speaking to us about Gaia Awakening. So Darren, welcome to Amethyst Fest. It's great having you.
Thanks for having me. I'm very honored to be here. I can feel that there's been a lot of magic happening over the weekend, and thank you, Chelsea, for putting this all together. Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay, awesome. Shall I just dive right in?
Yeah, you have the full hour and you can do whatever you would like with it. So you can, just speak. We'll have the chat option. People can take themselves off of mute.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, hi, everyone. I'm coming to you here from Costa Rica. I'm near Santa Teresa on the West Coast, with Mama Pacific Ocean not so far behind me. And I've pretty much been here since January, and it's been quite a beautiful bubble of bliss. And if you've been down to Costa Rica, you know that the energies of Gaia, which was the Greek name for the goddess that is Earth, is very powerful here and very potent. And one of the reasons that I found myself in Costa Rica a lot over the past few years is because Mother Earth is so loud and proud here. And I've been feeling a call, as many people have been, to bridle ourselves deeper to the earth, to really take on what I think is the biggest healing that needs to be done on the planet right now, which is healing this broken relationship between humanity and the earth, and trying to figure out how we can tousle ourselves once again into the interdependent ecology of the planet. I know COVID is obviously the story of this year, but I think if people really dive a little deeper into the changes that have happened to our civilization since this pandemic, one of the great stories that I believe needs to be exalted more is the fact that the earth has been healing profoundly and immensely this year. And in large part due to the fact that human activities have had to downgrade. And there's lots of accounts of this. If you just do some searches on the interwebs, such things that, the blue skies have returned to Beijing, China, a place that I actually lived near for a few years. The pollution there is really, really appalling. And now people can actually see the sky, and the birds are returning to Tiananmen Square, and people can hear them singing in the day. And that's just bringing such wonder and bliss to people who in some ways have been never seen the blue sky in Beijing before in their lives, depending on their age. There's even been signs saying that the ozone layer has been healing exponentially fast since COVID hit, and we've had a lockdown in large parts of the world. Animals are returning to their habitats as humans sort of go into their enclaves of quarantine. And I think this is a really righteous moment for the earth and for us to really be observing that. I think we've all been sort of praying for a moment where we can sort of halt all these systems of injustice and really raping of the earth. And a lot of the indigenous elders that I've been following have been saying that COVID is in some ways a multidimensional experience. And one of the dimensions, it's the answer to our prayers, that prayer to put a halt, to put a sacred pause on things so we can reassess how we want to behave on this planet, and to also observe nature in more of a being state rather than the perpetual doing state of our culture. And that's not to diminish any of the suffering or lives that have been lost. There is a dimension of that to this pandemic as well. But I just want to set that context before I go any deeper. So just a quick background about me. I loved everything Chelsea shared, but also I want to add that one of my passions in life has been Indigenous peoples and Indigenous wisdom. And I hail from Toronto, Canada originally, and we call the Native Americans up there the First Nations people. And I have had the blessed experience to have some First Nations, Indigenous teachers in my life. And one of them in particular that I went deep with for over 2 years, she was a Mohawk elder. She set me on this decade-long odyssey, which I've been on, which was to seek the European indigenous identity. She literally gave us a teaching one day about the white indigenous people, and that just chain of words, white indigenous people, was something that was very enigmatic for me. I'd never heard of white indigenous people, and I was quite riveted. And I went up to her afterwards and I asked her, what is this white indigenous peoples or race? I've never heard of them. And she said, well, it's a mystery to us, but it's for you to find out. And I really set upon an adventure in figuring out that mystery since then. And I delved very deep into the Nag Hammadi library, particularly the writings and teachings of a man named John Lam Lash. And that was basically my main sort of perspective in. So before I go any deeper about that, I'm just going to read something that I've written. So I'm actually working on a book right now called Earth Night, and it's kind of semi-autobiographical about this journey of recovering indigenous identity and really exalting indigenous wisdom. And I think this will help to set the stage a little dramatically. I like to teach in stories and poetry as well, and music. So this is a piece that I wrote. What sort of creature is this luminous woman? Now come, let us lay hold of her and cast our seed into her that she may become soiled and unable to access her inner light. Then those who she bears will be under our charge. But Eve, being a free power, laughed at their decision. She put mist in their eyes and escaped them, the archons. That is a passage from the Nag Hammadi library called On the Origin of the World. What if we've been lied to for thousands of years? What if his story is missing something vital? Her story. Why did the ancient Gnostics warn us of errors in our consciousness? Why were they constantly teaching about misinformation and mind viruses? Who are the archons? Conspiracies upon conspiracies. What if we didn't fall? What if paradise wasn't lost? What's the ancient symbolic meaning of the serpent? What did the yogis know, and what are we remembering? Do you believe in false gods? The rise of Eve. Did you know Siddhartha Buddha spoke of achieving enlightenment twice? What was the first one? The one he said was supreme, in the bedchamber with his beloved Yasodhara. But she is not mentioned. She is never mentioned. Why? Passionate enlightenment. How many stories have we been told and believed to be wholly true for millennia? What if some were deceptions? Seek and find gnosis. She is here always. The whore of Babylon lies, hidden no more. Gaia is awakening. Recall Mara's final test to Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Mara, the king of demons, asked Buddha, what if his enlightenment was just his own self-grandiose experience? Who will bear witness? Buddha touched the ground and said, she is my witness. She, Sophia, equals wisdom. Sophia also equals the goddess that is earth. Greatest conspiracy of all time? Cathar prophecy. In 700 years, the laurel will become green again. Now. The world was born by Sophia's smile. So said the Gnostics of Valentia. So, just to set the stage a little. So, Maybe you found that captivating in some way. So that was inspired by basically this adventure I've been on for the last decade, trying to recover a sense of the world according to the goddess and the ancients and indigenous wisdom. And I'll delve first now into the Nag Hammadi library, because when I was set upon this journey, I was just swaddled to mystery. I had never heard of white indigenous people. I had no understanding that they even existed. And when I set upon this journey, I was introduced to this text called the Nag Hammadi Library, which really opened things up to me. So the Nag Hammadi Library was written 2,000 years ago, but it was discovered or recovered in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, which is in Upper Egypt. And it was literally serendipity of the finest kind. It was a farmer who literally found a cave on his land, and caves were always considered sacred to the ancient ones. They were places where we would go to commune to the deeper energies of earth, what they called the telluric energies. And within this cave, this farmer found a series of urns, like little vases or vases. And within these vases or urns, he found all these scrolls. There were uh, dozens of scrolls, and they were quite broken up and fragmented, and they were written in an ancient language called Coptic, which is an ancient Greek language. And these scrolls were given to scholars who translated them. They were eventually translated into English in the 1970s, and they created quite a firestorm because these seem to be the only living documents that we've been able to recover of what is known as the ancient pagans. So pagan was a derogatory term actually that was leveled at people who were European and indigenous. What we have not been taught in our history is that before the rise of monotheism and the Roman Christian Empire, there were tons of European, if you will, indigenous peoples all over Europe. And they lived in villages, they were polytheistic, and a lot of them worshipped the goddess in many forms. And the Celts were some, the Gauls, the Vikings. We have echoes, but we hardly have much real information about them because there was such a precise, methodical, and brazen genocide of these people. They were completely wiped out from history. And if you want evidence of an event that had to do with the severing of this wisdom, look no further than the burning of the Library of Alexandria by Julius Caesar. The Library of Alexandria was said to be kind of like the ancient internet. It was this library of thousands and thousands and thousands of texts. And Alexandria was a port city. It was one of the great cities in the ancient world of Rome. And anyone who would come into Alexandria, they would ask if you were coming from a different culture, that they would take note of the wisdom of your culture. So it was really compiling this great wisdom of what humanity really is. But as we've seen with the nefarious energies of colonialism, this kind of scourge that has gone all over the planet, not only murdering indigenous people and laying waste to the beautiful ecology of the planet, but even more dangerous, I would say, is severing our lineage to the wisdoms of these people, killing the wisdoms of the shamans and the wisdom keepers and the elders. It's pretty much colonial strategy that when they would go into indigenous communities, they would try and take out the elders and the shamans first, because they began to understand that if you kill the access to wisdom, that is really the guiding light, the guiding thing that guides a culture into strength and nobility. So we've kind of woken up in this age in a kind of mystical crime scene, if you will. We have all these ancient ruins all over the planet, like the pyramids. We have all these ancient texts, and there's a lot of blind spots in our history. And it's really up to us to start filling in these mysteries, or like I like to say, missed stories. And the Nag Hammadi has given, for me personally, an incredible missed story. And I'd like to dive into it a little deeper, because within the Nag Hammadi is a particular mythology. And if any of you are students of mythology or myth, you know how enriching it is to your life. In fact, human beings are mythological creatures. As I like to say, the true meaning of life is meaning. We are meaning animals. We need meaning. And if you look at cultures throughout time, the great cultures have always had powerful mythologies, which is what John Lam Lash calls guiding narratives. So no matter who you were, if you were born into a culture at a certain age, usually when you were coming of age into puberty, you'd be taken through a kind of effervescent experience, like an initiation ceremony, where the teachings of this guiding story, this grand narrative that's really directing the course of this culture or village together, is given to you. And not only is it told to you so that you can get a sense of, for instance, the cosmology, the origins of all life, you know, the grand mysteries of what is life, what is humanity, what is our purpose in this cosmos. But these mythologies also gave you a precise feeling of personal destiny, your role to be a part of something transpersonal, a transpersonal purpose. Now, my background is actually in Chinese medicine. That's where I began my journey. And I actually studied with an incredible vanguard called Lonnie Jarrett in America, who initiated us into the real Taoist origins of the medicine. And in ancient classical Chinese medicine, they really believed that one's health had fundamentally was based on one's achievement of one's destiny. If you were not fulfilling your destiny, there was always this kind of like low grade feeling of discontent and depression in your life that would slowly erode your will, your joy, and could lead to really grave illnesses. And if we take a moment just to zoom out the lens on our current modern civilization, Western civilization, which has colonized most of the world, and we ask ourselves, what is the mythology? What is the guiding narrative of Western civilization? Well, for me, we don't find exactly good answers to that question. We see things like perpetual progress, capitalism, perpetual technological advancement, destruction and scavenging the ecosystem for resources. Uh, and if we zoom into a country like mine in Canada, I could add in watching hockey or drinking Tim Hortons coffee, kind of vacuous ideas of meaning. And I think this is one of the reasons that you find in a lot of modern industrial civilizations, depression rates and mental illness rates that are in very high percentiles. I mean, we're told in the West that Tim Hortons donuts, nice. We're told in the West that we have mental illness rates upwards to 70%. And if we factor in the silence of a lot of male voices, because a lot of men still are conditioned not to share their feelings, I would say that the majority, if not like 90% of people in the West are dealing with some kind of mental illness, whether it's anxiety, depression. And I would be so bold to correlate that to a few very powerful factors, but one of them being that we have no sense of transpersonal purpose that gives us true, passionate, inspiring meaning in our lives. Now, although that is tragic and harrowing on one degree, on the other hand, that presents this incredible possibility for us to retell our story, not only our personal story, but start to together even start to share in universal values and stories so that we can provide a new meaning, not only to our lives, but to this world itself. And of course, I would also deepen that to say that should be in rapport with the earth itself, as I'll get into, because the earth is actually much more conscious and alive than we've been told or led to believe. And I'll be cycling back to John Lam Lash quite a bit. I really recommend looking into his work. He wrote a book called Not in His Image, which was very profound for me. And he has a beautiful passage that maybe I'll read at the end of the talk, but it's really about how we should really be seeing ourselves to play this role. We are all playing this role in this new narrative. And I would also say that COVID is actually an opportunity. Some of the indigenous peoples have actually been sharing that in some ways the virus has been created by nature itself. Now, I know there's lots of conspiracy theories and ideas that the virus may have been created in a lab in Wuhan, and who knows, to be honest, there is quite a lot of mystery around it. But I like to think in terms of multi-dimensions, that many things can be true at the same time. This is really what being in this new age is all about, the Aquarian age, if you will. And another truth about coronavirus is that it's given us this moment to stop and really listen to the earth if we're open to it. And I want to share that when I found myself in Costa Rica in March when COVID happened, and for me, I was in a festival here called Sound and Silence with Beautiful Soul Family, and we were just raising these voluptuous, robust vibrations of love and joy. And then I looked at my phone one day, and I'm a mystical spiritual guy, but I love basketball. And I saw on my phone, oh my God, they canceled the NBA. And I knew in that moment that this was very serious and that the wheel of our civilization had just stopped in a certain way. And I found myself choosing to stay here in Costa Rica rather than go home. And luckily my flight got canceled and refunded. And I found myself sitting on the beach every morning before the ocean and meditating. And as I often do in the morning, I spend time just connecting to the energy of the earth, to Gaia. And I found myself closing my eyes and feeling quite quickly this connection to her that was more visceral than I'd ever felt. I started to see colors all around me, particularly hues of the rainbow. And I started to feel her presence, and I would almost hear her voice speaking to me. And there was this all-pervading sense that everything was all good. Because if you remember back in March, it was quite harrowing when COVID first hit. It really jostled that catastrophobia, as Barbara Handclough talks about, that end of the world fear that we have. But I got this feeling that the earth was really excited and joyful to have everything just slow down. And it was almost like she was taking big stretches. And she was just, taking a breath of fresh air. And I could also feel that there was this excitement. Because as we've seen with all the tumultuousness on social media about what to believe right now and the chaos of information, we've been given this pause to really put a pause to that meaning of the world, that matrix of a meaning that hasn't been serving us, that meaning that says the earth is not alive, that we can just use the forces of industry to rape and pillage her for our resources, the meaning of the world that says we should be constantly working and making money in this system of predatory capitalism. All of these stories, all of these meanings have suddenly been paused as well. And we have this real moment to retell a new story. So on that note, I'd like to tell you an old story that I believe is still very alive today, and something that we can all, if you feel called, perhaps take a hand in singing in a new octave, to borrow from musical theory. So now I'm going to share with you a story that was discovered within the Nag Hammadi library. And I've discovered since then that this story, which is the fallen goddess story of the goddess known as Sophia, who is the earth, may be one of the oldest stories on the planet. There's actually explorations that say this story may go back 40,000 years to Magian or magician orders that existed on this planet. So I'm going to take you on this little journey now, and I hope you enjoy. So, within the Nag Hammadi library, we find ourselves rendered in this ancient cosmological drama. And it all starts in what is known as the pleroma. So if you look at the nature of all galaxies, how they are structured physically, you have in the center of every galaxy a huge radiant bulb of light. And then you have spirals of radiant arms that come out of this ball of light. This ball of light was called the pleroma, which is a Greek word. It literally means the land of the gods and the goddesses, or what they were called aeons, which means divine currents of being. And it is said that in the pleroma of every galaxy, these aeons reside, creating life, creating worlds, that they then emanate out from the pleroma into the galactic arms to seed and create life. In some ways, you can think of this as this theory of panspermia, which is literally the idea that comets in some way are kind of cosmic sperm that are seeds perhaps sent from the pleroma containing information, biological information that then smash into planets, fertilizing them, bringing them life. This is very interesting when you consider the as above and so below of some of these reflections. And this is said to be the endless and eternal delight of the aeons, to create life and then emanate them, shoot them out into the galactic arms. And if you think of physics and time and space, the further you move away from the pleroma, which is the radiant light, like the central sun, where everything is pure energy, pure ethereal, beautiful, cosmic, unimaginable, incredible, omnipotent energy, when it moves further away from that central pleroma, it moves further and further into materialization, which is why in our solar system, for example, Pluto is perhaps the most material, solid, ice, nothing alive planet. Although they recently found life on Venus, who knows? They may find life everywhere at some point. So they send them out into the galactic arms for life to materialize. And then it is said the aeons, the gods and goddesses, watch from this beautiful citadel, celestial citadel in the center of the galaxy. And this is their delight. So once upon a galactic time, there was an aeon who was called Sophia. And she was said to be a young aeon, a feminine aeon. And she had this beautiful idea to create something. And it was called the Anthropos, which literally means the human genome, the essence of humanity. And it said the aeons, just like human beings, have to procreate with a masculine and a feminine aeon to create the life. So it is said that Sophia had a consort. Some say this consort's name was Telete, and some say it was Christos, which has obvious other meanings for us, given the idea of Christ and Jesus. And it's said they came together and they mated, and then it was said that Sophia's Anthropos idea, the essence of humanity, was sent out into our galaxy. Now, it is said that the first 9 attempts of the Anthropos didn't take root. They didn't take life. They failed. It was a failed cosmic experiment. And Sophia, it is said, grew so much in love with this creation, the Anthropos, that she decided to do something that was quite unorthodox, quite Lilith of her, if you will. And she decided that on this 10th occurrence of the Anthropos, she really wanted it to work. So on this occasion, it is said that she actually took the essence of the Anthropos and left the pleroma. Now it is said that the aeons are not supposed to leave the pleroma, that in so doing would be breaking a kind of cosmic law, if you will. But just like human beings, we incur karma, and so do the gods and goddesses incur karma. So when Sophia left, there were certain consequences that happened. And we're told that she zoomed all the way to this position in our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, where we now find this planet Earth. And she began to turn into a planet. But at first, we're told that she actually was turning into this material entity, and she was kind of freaking out. She didn't know this was going to happen. So she saw herself moving from this beautiful aeonic form of ethereal light into this dense planet of matter. It is said that she was in a state of emotional consternation. Yes, Gaia has emotions. And that is why we find all these reflections in the sciences. So we now know that the Earth, for the first million or so years of our planet, it was literally just seething lava, rocks, volcanoes, nothing growing. It was an ecology in absolute chaos. Now, according to the Gnostics, they were saying this was Sophia, Gaia Sophia, literally freaking out at what was happening to her. Now, the other very dramatic thing that happened, which for me is one of the most vital missing pieces in our modern story, perhaps. It helps to explain a lot of how we've gone wayward off our true dharmic path as a human species. Is they say that when Sophia stopped at this location in the Milky Way, given that space is literally a kind of plasma, it's a kind of ocean of energy, when she stopped, just like if you slap a lake with your hand, there were ripples of that energy that moved out into the plasma of space, ripples of Gaia Sophia's energy. And remember, this is all in the Nag Hammadi library, 2,000-year-old text. This is not a sci-fi novel that just came out last week, which I always have to remind myself. It is said there were these inorganic particles just floating around in space. And you can imagine these like ripples of this beautiful, divine, fertile light energy from Sophia moving around in all directions. And it is said that her energy, very fertile energy, fertilized these inorganic particles, giving life inadvertently, perhaps mistakenly in a certain way. Although, are there any mistakes in this universe? That's something up for debate. So they specifically say something about this life. They say there were two species of life that were created. First off, one of these inorganic particles was said to absorb the majority of Sophia's light compared to the others. And this creature that came to life saw itself as a kind of god presiding over our galaxy. A kind of mental instability that was working in it is described. And two species of life came out of this. One was said to look like a kind of human fetus with big black eyes, maybe the gray head aliens. And the other one was described to look like something matching a combination, a blend of a lion and a reptile. Now, of course, when I first read this, I was already a self-proclaimed conspiracy analyst. And I had found myself, as some of you may have found yourself, stumbling into rabbit holes about predatory lizard, reptile, aliens. And you're thinking to yourself, this is just, wow, I've got to turn off the computer. I've gone way too far down that rabbit hole. What the hell is this? So I'd always put that kind of on the back burner, although I had had times in my life during different spiritual practices where I've astral traveled and witnessed these kinds of beings, but I'd never seen this referenced in such a way in a text that gave it a kind of weight as it did with the Nag Hammadi. And so I was kind of stunned to read about these ancient reptiles in this 2,000-year-old document. So these two species of life, with their kind of godlike being leading them, were called the archons. And archons literally translates as the ones that came before. And that's because they came before humanity. Because remember, Gaia Sophia at that point is still this seething rock. Nothing is able to live there. We haven't bloomed on our planet yet into full life. So we go back to the pleroma. All of the gods and goddesses are watching from the celestial citadel. They're seeing Sophia's drama and they're like, what can we do to help? Look at poor Sophia. She's left the pleroma. There's all this karma, all this drama happening to her. And that is when her consort, Telete Christo, stepped forward and said, let me help her in some way. And in some celestial way, they were able to project, maybe astrally project, Telete Christos to Sophia. And they're very clear on this matter that Telete Christos didn't show up and do any kind of mansplaining. He wasn't there to like tell Sophia what to do. All he did in a very tantric way was give Sophia the space to come into relaxation and remember who she was. And if you study any forms of Tantra, you find this dance between Shiva and Shakti, where Shiva, the ancient masculine principle, is often personified as the spinal column in the human anatomy, this vertical structure. And the Shakti is the Kundalini Deva, which literally starts to spiral up and down the Shiva. And it is said that one of the innate natures of the masculine and the feminine is the masculine provides the space and the structure for that feminine to really dance in a dynamic effulgence of energy. So in some ways, this was mirrored here in this moment when Telete Christos literally just gave Sophia a moment just to relax, remember who she was. And interestingly, we know in the history, the geological history of our planet, I should say the geological history of this planet, that overnight, one of the great unknown mysteries of Earth is that it went from seething, chaotic ecology to boom, an autopoietic, self-organizing, beautiful, interdependent ecology as we see it now today, in a cosmic night, just like that, snap of the fingers. No idea, scientists have no idea how that or why that happened. But of course, the Gnostics with their stories say, well, that was when the Christos intervention sort of happened and helped Sophia to come into herself. So it was then that it was said that the anthropos, us, humanity, began to bloom on her body. And we began to unfold in rapport with the goddess that is Earth. And this is why we find in the ancient world the idea of the mystery schools and the Gnostics. And in a lot of these Gnostic mystery schools, there was this devotion to Sophia. In a lot of the classical European Indo-European world, you see the goddess as truly the foremost connector, as our sign of connecting to divinity. She is everywhere and she is supreme. The Mahadeva, Mahashakti. And for the European Gnostics, this was Sophia. So let me just define a few things. So Gnosticism, if you do some research on it, you will find that a lot of people say Gnosticism is a religion and that it is a kind of primitive form of Christianity. And I share with John Lamb Lash's assertion that no, Gnosticism is actually an alternative to religion. The very clear statement that he made that I very much concur with. An alternative to religion, because if you look at the meaning of what it means to be a Gnostic, it means to know as the divine knows. And that means every human being can become, as the yogis say, self-realized. We don't necessarily need a priest or priestess to act as an ambassador to the divine, though that can play a certain role in ceremonies and culture. But truly, we have innately within us the ability to be personally connected to the divine. And in some of these ancient mystery schools, they would do initiation ceremonies to really enthuse that connection. So for example, in some of these Gnostic mystery schools, the pyramids of Egypt were these ancient temples where these rites of initiation would occur. And there are many subterranean chambers in the pyramids. And it is said that some of these neophytes, these initiates, would go into the pyramids for sometimes a month and go through all different kinds of rites of initiation. And it was said that the highest initiation was drinking of the Grail cup and drinking a psychedelic brew in this cup that was called the Kikion, which we know had some kind of fermented barley ingredient in it. Interesting, they say it took 20 years of training to get to the point where you could be ready to drink this cup, which is like kind of different than how we partake in ayahuasca ceremonies. Not to say any is better or worse, we're in a different timeline now. But I find it also an interesting anecdote that if you've studied one of the stories that has kept some of these ancient goddess mystery school traditions alive, that's the King Arthur stories, the legend of King Arthur. In that story, the Knights of the Round Table, these very noble warriors who are all governed by the lady. In chivalry, everyone is governed by the lady, the divine feminine. They are sent out to search for the Grail cup. And the first knight to find it was Galahad. And he finds it in this very mysterious castle. And when he drinks the Grail cup, he goes into absolute bliss in an instant, kind of like Krishna, or as Krishna appears before Arjuna in his chariot, when Arjuna says, show me what you really look like, you know, and there's like the 1,000 faces of Krishna. And Arjuna's like, oh my gosh, it's too beautiful, please. Galahad sees all this beautiful beauty. He goes like 0 to infinite bliss in a second from drinking from this cup. And he dies. His nervous system literally doesn't have the capacity to hold this energy. And I think there's a little teaching there that we can sort of ground and embody, because some of us see spirituality as something that we can just like turn the car on and just find the nearest Autobahn highway where there's no speed limit, and we can just go and accelerate and evolve and take, you know, 12 different workshops at once and all these different teachings and certifications. But truly, from what I've learned working with the elders and the ancient wisdoms, is there's really something to a graceful, slow progress in some ways to really allow things to ground. This is also why in yoga, hatha yoga, the most basic form of yoga, really emphasizes that the first thing you work with is the asanas to prepare the physical body for the divine vibrations of enlightened consciousness. You really need to be strong in your physical vessel and your mind. And if anyone's done ayahuasca, you know, any kind of entheogenic plant medicines, that it's a very intense experience. And oftentimes that experience can be more useful if you know how to meditate, if you've done a lot of yoga in your body. I love doing pranayama before I do plant medicine ceremonies to prime myself. So this also is why in a lot of the ancient Gnostic literature, I always found this reference to Sophia being the terrible beauty. And I was like, terrible beauty? What is that? Why would beauty be terrible? But then it made sense. It's beauty that is so immense, so intense, it's almost too much to apprehend. So after they would drink of this kikyon, going back to the Gnostics, and they had trained 20 years to be initiated, when they would drink the kikyon, they would say a few things would happen that were very interesting. The first thing would be that they would see and perceive a living light everywhere, a living light. And this would put them into awe, because they'd see it in their hands, in the walls around them, in the fields surrounding. Everything was animated by this living light. And that light is Sophia's soul body. And it would make people realize in an instant, my gosh, we really are all just like a part of the earth. Like we're living in her soul. Just such a beautiful revelation. Almost brings tears to my eyes to think about that, that we're all living in the soul of the earth. Now, the second thing that would happen is this living light would instruct the initiates. And it would say to them who they are, what their medicine is, and how they were supposed to serve in the world, which is so compelling to me, because I've actually done a vision quest in the Native American tradition. And a Native American vision quest, and at least the tradition that I did it in, the Anishinaabe tradition in Canada, it was the same idea, to go out to nature for 3 days without food and water, to literally receive teachings from Mother Earth about who you are, what your medicine is, what is your gift, and how you're supposed to serve a greater Dharma than yourself. So profound for me to witness all these relations. This is really why we're living in what the Mayans said, the time of the 9th wave of galactic consciousness, the time of unity where a universal wisdom is really apprehended. So once the initiate would go through this experience, see the living light, be instructed, be given their spirit name, told what their gift is, their medicine, and how to really serve this greater vision, they would come out of the ceremony and they would be called telestai, which meant those who are aimed. Remember at the beginning, I was talking about how important it is to have this aim of purpose, of transpersonal purpose. Well, the ancients really got that. So everyone had this aim. And this was the highest form of gnosis, or knowledge, that a person could fulfill in their lives. And for centuries, if not millennia, these ancient civilizations had this very devoted teaching to be in connection with the intelligence of Gaia Sophia as the essence of what guided us and guided our cultures and guided our species. in some ways, the hardest part about the vision quest I went on was not depriving myself of food and water for 3 days. It was actually coming back to the city and realizing all the waywardness of modern culture, how it was due to the fact that we had cut this tie not only to the earth as some fanciful concept, but literally to just tangible guiding wisdom. Without wisdom, we are lost. We are vulnerable to becoming a raw. And that vulnerability has been very compromised and very exploited by the archons. So I'm drawing to the end of this saga, and the archons is something that can be a bit controversial for people, because in a lot of New Agey spirituality, we don't like to think of darkness or forces that might be malevolent or evil. And I want to start by saying the Gnostics didn't believe in that either. They did not believe in good and evil, but they did believe in sanity and insanity. And they said human beings had something very sane in us. We have what's known as the epinoa, the divine spark of the divine mind that was from the Pleroma, that was from Sophia and then given to us. And we all have a little fragment of this. This is what makes us really the beautiful essence of being divine humans. And the archons are said to not have this, or rather maybe have it in such a small, dim portion, because they were also created by Sophia, remember. So it is said that the archons are jealous, envious of humanity, that they see that we have this epinoa that they don't have in the full splendor, and they want it. And I find this very interesting, because when you talk about negative entities and a lot of shamanic teachings, they talk about the parasitic nature of these negative forces, this kind of vampiric energies that want to like suck something out of us, like they want to live off of us in a certain way, live off of our light. And this is said to be how the archons operate. The epinoa is also connoted to creative, innovative intelligence, which is something human beings display all the time. The archons are said not to have this. Their mind works in a very mechanical, cold, logical way without heart and emotive energy, which I find very interesting, because if you look at a lot of the systems of patriarchy, and now what we're dealing with like technology being really pushed into kind of a tyrannical arena, you can really see that mechanistic mind really suffocating the more poetic, intuitive, spiritual, mystical side of ourselves. And in the end, we really need to balance them both. I also find it interesting that if you look at the root of evil in other belief systems, like in Christianity, for example, it is said that Lucifer's rebellion against God happened the moment God created humanity and looked at the angels and said, okay, angels, this is like the newborn baby around here. They're going to be like clumsy toddlers, and they need like babysitters. They need like help to like mentor them. And I station you, I give you, angels, the ministry of being their support. But for some reason, Lucifer in that moment said, no, that must mean that God doesn't love us as much. And when you look at that, I find it very interesting, because it's almost like an admission of mental illness that Lucifer's saying, because why would all the other angels just, of course, we're here, everything's just serving this interdependence. But this one angel had this kind of egotistical moment saying, no, like, God, you don't love us as much. It was kind of this childish, immature reaction, if you will. And I find that very interesting, because I find that almost similarly rendered with the archons. But the Gnostics go on in the Nag Hammadi, and they describe that the archons became meddlers into our consciousness. They're interdimensional, not necessarily physical beings, but they can work inside of our mind, convincing us that their thoughts are our thoughts. And this is one of the big problems and you find this in a lot of shamanic wisdom schools. The shamans are really trained to have sovereignty over their mind. And in Don Juan's teachings, Carlos Castaneda, he talks about this, the flying ones. He talks about these predators that literally prey on human consciousness and have really taken us off our pathway. Don Juan actually says that these predators have been placed inside of our minds, what he calls a foreign installation, which he says he witnesses in higher states of awareness when he can see more of the light-bodied auric anatomy of humanity, that in the crown chakra, the foreign installation looks like this pendulum light energy that's going back and forth, which is duality consciousness. But when this foreign installation is somehow disengaged, disempowered, and we're back into our natural state of mind, Don Juan says, then that light moves into a spiral dynamic, which I find really beautiful. And I resonate with that a lot in my life. So we're really trying to really trump this duality consciousness and come to more of this holistic multi-dimensionality. So why I think this is important is because when you look at the state of the world right now, they say the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing us that he doesn't exist. But if you've ever done work with indigenous people and shamans, you know that at a certain point they say that we have to be aware that we are under threat, under assault by these entities. And that's not to fearmonger, because the beautiful thing that I'm going to end with is that it is said that humanity has incredible innate powers of genius, and that it is our destiny to overcome this tyranny of the archons, that for the last 2,000 years, they've truly invaded and infiltrated us and planted what's known as mind viruses. They literally say that patriarchy is a mind virus created by the archons, that yes, we have the responsibility to observe that we've enabled that program, but we can also disempower and disengage and dismantle that program using our genius, using our innate epinoa. And it is said that in some ways the archons are our greatest teachers. Just like Luke Skywalker could not have become the great Jedi that he became without Darth Vader presenting that adversity to him. My favorite quote is actually by William Shakespeare. It is, "Sweet are the uses of adversity." So in some ways, working with your mind, using meditation as an act of self-defense, learning how to be clear about your mission, learning how to be clearly connected to the goddess, these are the ways that we truly come back into our own sovereignty, and we can throw off the chains of this mind control and this tyranny. And the last thing I'll share about the Nag Hammadi is there's this beautiful passage at the end of the text where the goddess Sophia literally confronts this false god of the archons and says to him that you will have a couple thousand years of tyranny over humanity, but at a certain point, humanity is going to awaken to their essence, and I am going to awaken with them in symbiosis. And when that happens, they're going to overthrow this tyranny so quickly that in 1 to 2 generations, they won't even remember that it existed, because they're going to be so engaged in truly creating this miraculous heaven on earth. So that is the story of Gaia Sophia. And I want you all to really take that in deeply and to realize that this story is something that is alive in our lives. And I really want to invite you to really connect to Mother Earth on the daily when you can. And I think we have enough time, maybe do a 5-minute meditation, Chelsea. Would that be okay to guide something?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So on that note, I'm just going to guide us into a quick meditation to connect you with Gaia Sophia in one of the more traditional ways that it is done. So I invite you, if you want to just close your eyes wherever you are, and just find your breath and start to breathe nice and deep into your body. As these healing tones of crystal bowls I'm playing suffuse the air. Just imagine, given that what we've covered in this workshop, imagine that you're breathing in the shining light of Gaia Sophia with every breath. It is said in the ancient world that we are not breathing, but we are being breathed by the goddess that is Earth herself. So imagine that you're breathing in her light, and as her light enters your body, it starts to permeate and move around your body, filling every cell of your being with its splendor, so that eventually, ultimately, your whole being starts to take on the nature of her light. So that you are shining now a wave of light in this ocean of light that pervades us all. And I'd like you to just call on the presence of Goddess into your being. And extend your love and gratitude to her. And feel the immense vastness of her body as the planet Earth. And the magnificence of her light. Feel that awe and that wonder. Know that you are a child of Gaia, that we are children of the earth. What does it do to your being to acknowledge that internally? I am a child of Goddess. I'm a child of the earth. And as you maintain this connection to her, just creating this reciprocity like a circuit with every breath, just breathing in her love. And with every breath out, see that you're gifting her your love in kind. And just continue deepening this loving relationship as I just sing a channeled prayer to Gaia Sophia. Feeling yourself at one with Gaia Sophia, the goddess, inviting her wisdom, her guidance into your life, knowing that every day, any moment, you can close your eyes and enter into the portal, the oracle of your heart. You can find her voice whispering wisdom to you, her guiding realm, ever showing you the way with love and affection. So you can come back to the space, finding your breath again. Welcome back. Yay. How is everybody?
So good.
I think you're muted, Chelsea. There you are.
Yes, I'm here. Do you guys all want to take yourselves off mute?